Is this finally a turning point?
We have now made a decisive breakthrough. Together, we have changed the original protocol and are today announcing the new Windsor framework.
We also both knew, dear Rishi, that we could do it.
Smiling alongside the EU Commission head, there was a promise of free-flowing trade from Britain to Northern Ireland, securing the union and sovereignty. In the Commons tonight, a warm reception, but it's not quite over the DUP line yet.
We need to look at all of this. We need to examine very carefully what the legal text means.
The PM has pulled this off after all these long years. It could be the defining moment of his premiership. But as well as the DUP, there are others reserving judgment and staying conspicuously quiet tonight, not least his predecessor, Boris Johnson. We'll take you through all the detail and the drama of the day. Also on News at 10 tonight. The beach, which became a cemetery, more than 100 now feared dead in the migrant shipwreck off Italy. The ground may have stopped shaking, but not the anger, fury in Turkey about the government's response to the earthquakes.
In a phrase you know so well, but has never been more true. Time's up.
The history maker Betty Boothroyd, first female Speaker of the House of Commons, dies at 93 and tributes pour in. And the Northern Lights head south, nature's spectacular sky show across the UK.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. There have been 4 Prime Ministers, 2 European Commission Presidents and nearly 7 years of arguments. But a 25-minute press conference today saw Rishi Sunak hail what he called a decisive breakthrough on Great Britain's trade arrangements with Northern Ireland. The subject, the most intractable problem in the whole of Brexit, has consumed much of the political capital ever since the UK voted to leave the EU. And even now, some unionists are reserving judgment on the new so-called Windsor framework until they've had time to pore over it line by line. Yet, at today's announcement, you didn't need to read between the lines to realise what a major step this was. The sight of Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen standing shoulder to shoulder, with Mrs von der Leyen even calling the PM Dear Rishi, representing a clear thawing in continental relations.
As with many things touched by Brexit, the road to an agreement was fraught with risk. But when the Prime Minister met the EU Commission President in Berkshire this morning, the smiles were broad. The deal all but done.
I know it hasn't always been easy at times, but we have got through it.
That a sentiment every one of his predecessors who tangled with Brexit would have echoed. But by the time the two arrived in Windsor's Guildhall, under the gaze of monarchs past, they hailed a moment of history and a new agreement to address the problems facing Northern Ireland since Brexit.
Together, we have changed the original protocol and are today announcing the new Windsor framework. Today's agreement delivers smooth-flowing trade within the whole United Kingdom, protects Northern Ireland's place in our union, and safeguards sovereignty for the people of Northern Ireland.
The Windsor framework attempts to address some of the factors disrupting trade in Northern Ireland. Under the new agreement, most customs checks will be removed for goods heading to Northern Ireland in a new streamlined green lane, whilst there'll be a red lane for goods heading onto the Republic and the EU. The UK will regain the right to set state aid and VAT for Northern Ireland, as in the rest of the UK, and in what's being called the Stormont Break, it will also have a veto or emergency break, with the ability to stop new EU laws being applied in the province. The Prime Minister has wrung more concessions out of the EU than previous Prime Ministers managed. The rapport here strikingly warm.
We also both knew, dear Rishi, that we could do it.
Although this confirmation that the European Court of Justice will still have a role could yet ruffle some feathers.
Yes, indeed, the European Court of Justice is the sole and ultimate arbiter of EU law. That's natural because it's prescribed by the EU legal order. So the ECJ will have the final say on EU law and single market issues.
As the PM headed to London to sell his deal to Parliament, Ursula von der Leyen set out for tea with the King. Involving the monarch at this delicate moment has also upset some Brexiters and Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party, who made it clear they're reserving judgment on the agreement.
It is clear that significant progress has been secured across a number of areas, whilst also recognising that there remain key issues of concern. There can be no disguising the fact, for example, that in some sectors of our economy in Northern Ireland, EU law remains applicable in our part of the United Kingdom.
The ultimate prize is to convince the DUP to rejoin power sharing in Stormont. If they're not committing yet, some key Eurosceptics are convinced this deal is a turning point.
Reflecting back over the last 5 years, that at any point in that time, if this deal had been on the table, those of us who are Brexiteers, those of us who are Remainers, those of us who are Unionists would have jumped on it.
And this was the Labour leader's promise.
Labour will support the Windsor framework. I hope that in coming days others will come to support the agreement in the same spirit and join Labour in voting to make the protocol work, in voting to face the future, in voting for country before party.
The man who negotiated the previous agreement, promising Brexit was done, has said he too will now study the detail. Late tonight, Rishi Sunak was still arguing for his deal in the Commons. He's achieved more than many expected, but to find out whether he can also restore devolved government in Northern Ireland, for that the DUP is going to make him wait. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
Well, as a reminder of just how much weight was attached to finding a workable new solution, consider just how much frustration the existing arrangement had attracted, from complaints of costly paperwork to the so-called sausage wars of 2021. Joel has been looking at what looks set to be abandoned and how these new proposals might work. So we'll take a deep breath. Joel.
The sausage wars look like they're over. The Northern Ireland Protocol, Julie, was agreed by Boris Johnson's government in an attempt to prevent a hard border on the island of Ireland after Brexit. It left Northern Ireland in the EU's single market for goods and created a customs border in the Irish Sea, requiring checks on products crossing from the main British mainland. Now, the protocol has caused huge problems for businesses. Marks and Spencer estimates paperwork and border delays costs it £30 million a year, and it upset the Democratic Unionist Party, which pulled out, of course, of the Northern Ireland executive a year ago, threatening not to return unless the protocol was scrapped. The protocol has not been scrapped. It has been renamed and significantly changed. The Windsor framework means goods travelling from Britain to Northern Ireland will now pass through a green channel with no checks at all. Goods bound for Ireland and beyond will go through a red channel with full controls intact. Now, the Prime Minister says these changes remove any sense of a border in the Irish Sea, and this trade expert agrees.
I think it shaves it away to nearly nothing, as long as, I guess we're lucky, but mostly as long as we try and administer it in a way that involves good sense and goodwill.
The EU has made significant concessions. The VAT rules the Chancellor sets in Westminster will now apply in Northern Ireland. Food, drink and medicines should move freely within the United Kingdom again. Yes, it's amazing that they didn't. Pets travelling to Northern Ireland will no longer require health certificates costing £180 a time. But Northern Irish businesses will still have to follow EU rules in areas like dairy and manufactured goods, and the European Court of Justice will retain jurisdiction over EU law in Northern Ireland. The Windsor framework, as you've been hearing, does include a Stormont break, which will allow the Assembly to oppose new EU single market laws if They have a significant impact on the day-to-day lives of businesses and citizens. So there's a process to follow, but the UK veto looks absolute. The EU cannot override it. And the question, Julie, is will it be enough for the DUP?
Indeed. Joel, thank you for that comprehensive explanation. Well, in order to trigger the Stormont break, which Joel just referred to, Stormont itself, of course, would have to get back up and running. Doing so would be welcomed, not least by the US President Joe Biden, who has tonight weighed in with his support for the framework. The Northern Ireland Assembly has not sat in a year since the DUP began a boycott over the protocol on democratic grounds, but plenty of companies had their own reasons to be pushing for change.
The Northern Ireland Protocol has been a huge headache for many businesses moving goods from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. Some have found new suppliers, others, like BJ Sauces, have had to put up their prices as key ingredients suddenly became harder to get.
Since the protocol, we've had major problem getting these products because they're animal based, and so they then need a veterinary certificate, which means the vet has to be booked. He also then has to have a full pallet's worth of product to certify.
So have you had to charge customers more, or have you had to make less money?
Yeah, but between the protocol and Ukraine hasn't helped, and so we've probably had to raise prices in the last year 25%.
Down the road in Stormont, unionist politicians are concerned by more than the disruption of trade. Traditional Unionist Voice is a party the DUP is wary of losing votes to. Their leader says sovereignty is still an issue.
Is it a situation, as clearly it is, that we're still in a foreign single market for goods, still under a foreign customs code, still subject to foreign law, and still subject to a foreign court?
Other parties here value the protocol for the access it grants to the single market. They're more concerned about getting the Stormont Assembly up and running again.
The people here have been left in limbo, they've left with uncertainty. I'm hoping that today, because we're at the end of the negotiation, the deal is now done, I'm hoping that today all energy and efforts focus at home here to making politics work and actually getting around the executive table.
The effects of not having a Stormont Assembly are being felt. At Lisburn Food Bank, they want a government that can take action as the cost of living crisis bites harder and harder.
This is people having to cut down on, will I eat tonight? You know, I can't afford to buy my child a new pair of school shoes even though they've grown out or there's holes in the bottom. It's everyday, very, very basic cuts that people are having to make. We're exhausted. We can't keep going and keep filling those holes where our government are meant to be the ones leading the way and supporting us in making those decisions.
All these are the pressures bearing down on the DUP as they decide whether the Prime Minister's deal stacks up enough for them to go back into government in Stormont. Carlton in News at 10, Belfast.
Well, our political editor Rob Peston joins us from his West London studio ahead of a special Monday night edition of his Peston programme. Pretty timely, Robert. Plenty of warm words today, even from some of the traditional hardliners of Brexit. What's your assessment of where we are tonight?
Yeah, and indeed, I'm talking to the minister who used to be known as the hard man of Brexit, Steve Baker, on my show in just a few minutes. What he's got to say, I think, will surprise some people. But I have to say, Julie, for me, this is a genuinely historic moment. I mean, I'll explain why. I have been living and breathing this Brexit debate since the UK voted to leave the EU in 2016. And to be quite frank, quite a lot of that's felt like a living nightmare. The animosity, the rows, the lack of consensus on the best way to take us out of the EU, and then consensus on how to have relations with the EU. And there was genuinely something astonishing in the House of Commons today, which is a Prime Minister announced a significant Brexit deal, and I didn't detect a single significant voice of opposition. There was extraordinary praise on all sides of the House, including from the Labour leader and from lots of Brexiters. There were reservations, it's true, from the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, who's going to play such an important role over coming days in determining whether or not his party can support the deal and therefore whether devolved government will start again in Northern Ireland, which is so vital, frankly, for the peace and prosperity of that province. But I just think we all have to take a moment to recognise that, as I say, Rishi Sunak, with a deal that ends quite a lot of the friction in the Channel over trade, that gives a bit more power back to Westminster when it comes to things like taxes in Northern Ireland, which gives a sort of veto, not a complete veto, to people, to the Assembly in Northern Ireland over future legislation. I mean, you know, peace broke out today on Brexit, and that's an important moment.
It is indeed. OK, Robert, thank you very much. We will see you a little later this evening. Thank you. Well, both Mr Sunak and Mrs von der Leyen were at pains to highlight the hard-earned peace gains of the Good Friday Agreement today, but a reminder of the fragility of that peace came only last week, of course, with the attempted murder of a police officer for which the new IRA has now taken responsibility. Today, fresh CCTV was released of the blue Ford Fiesta used by the gunman. They drove away from the sports complex in County Tyrone, having fired at least 10 shots last Wednesday night. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell remains in hospital fighting for his life. To southern Italy now, where once again the tragic human cost of the migrant crisis has been brought straight to Europe's shores. There are fears tonight that a shipwreck late on Saturday has left around 100 migrants dead. Dozens of bodies have been washed up after a wooden sailing boat hit stormy weather en route from Turkey. The best part of 200 people are thought to have been on board, many refugees from Afghanistan, and many of them believed to be children.
On the sandy beaches of Calabria's Ionian coast, the splintered remains of a boat. Shattered like the lives of so many on board. Migrants hoping for a better future. Life jackets among the wreckage washed up on the shore could not save those who have perished. Possessions on the beach, a reminder of the terrible human tragedy that happened out at sea. This morning, rescuers continued to find bodies. Around 80 people survived, but the number who died is thought to be far greater.
It was a spine-chilling scene. Many bodies disseminated on the beach, among them many children.
The search continues for victims of Sunday's shipwreck, when a boat smashed into rocks close to land. Those on board the vessel, which set off from Turkey last week, say it was carrying around 170 people.
Another trend that is different from other sea crossing is the number of families and children. You know, usually it's just single men.
Charities are supporting the survivors. The majority of the migrants were from Afghanistan, including women fleeing the Taliban, only to die in European waters.
When they're living in a country where there is no freedom, there is no liberty, there is no access to the basic healthcare, to the basic rights, social, and there is no future for kids, no future for family, no future for the individuals, they're ready to bet anything possible to try the journey and to start a new life.
Once again, a crossing by migrants desperate to reach Europe has ended with the most terrible loss of life. Martha Fairley, News at 10.
In the 3 weeks since two terrible earthquakes rocked Turkey and Syria, the initial shock of many survivors quickly turned to anger. Anger at an official response that seemed sluggish. Anger at structures that failed building standards. And now anger at pledges to rebuild that, frankly, seem impossible. The lives of more than 50,000 lay dead beneath the debris, extinguished with them the hopes of many who survived. And today the Turkish president begged their forgiveness.
In Adıyaman, amid a wasteland strewn with bricks, steel and rubble, the city's clock tower is among a scattering of buildings that stand unscathed. Its hands frozen at 4:17, the time the first earthquake hit. All around it, destruction, buildings broken or reduced to ruin. Others listing like shipwrecks in a sea of rubble, suburbs that have become cemeteries. In a city of 270,000, it's thought 10% of the population here perished. Aifa and her family survived but have been left destitute. Facing an uncertain future, living in a tent, sceptical of President Erdogan's pledge to rebuild ruined cities like Adıyaman within a year.
It'll be just the same as now, so probably help will be cut or stopped. We'll sit and we'll take care of ourselves. I don't think the government will help us. It's going to take 10 to 15 years to rebuild this area alone.
Those that can afford to are leaving the city. Some even hiring cranes to salvage belongings from their high-rise apartments. Those left behind dependent on aid camps for basic needs. At one, where dozens were lining up for food. This man told me he believes the government will help people with jobs and new homes within a year. When another stepped in to furiously disagree. Nobody arrived to help at my village for 10 days. Where is the government? Where is justice, he says. Amid that mounting anger, a visit to Adıyaman today by President Erdogan, asking the people for forgiveness for the initial slow response, blaming the tremors and bad weather. But discontent is spreading. In Istanbul, football fans threw thousands of soft toys onto the pitch for children affected by the earthquake, while chanting, "Government resign." Back in Adıyaman, this man isn't waiting for the government to rebuild. We found him salvaging what he could from his crumbling apartment and loading up his tractor to leave. I am moving to a village 35 kilometers away, he told me, where there is no electricity or running water, but where I feel safer. What he's leaving behind is a crumbled city, where hope for the future is all but gone. Sejal Karia, News at 10, Adıyaman, Turkey.
Both groundbreaking and trailblazing Baroness Betty Boothroyd was remembered today following her death at the age of 93. The first woman to be elected as Commons Speaker, her successor said she broke the glass ceiling with panache. That inimitable style has variously been described as no-nonsense and formidable. But for the woman who dominated the chair through the turbulent 90s, the ultimate honour this afternoon as Parliament paid silent tribute to one of their own.
The office she held has a long history, but Betty Boothroyd made it her own.
Order! Order!
The first woman in the Commons hot seat, and in an era when TV cameras were still new to the chamber, she relished the limelight.
Yes, point of order.
A love of performance was in her blood.
My memories are of living at the Theatre Girls Club in Greek Street in Soho.
She was famously a dancer in a West End chorus line. But as the daughter of a Yorkshire textile worker, so too was the Labour movement, though the audition for Westminster was a long one.
The main issues have been cost of living, rent and old age pensions.
Miss Boothroyd, do you find being a woman a drawback in politics?
No, I don't. Perhaps in some personal respects it's a drawback, but not really. I think that I can cope equally as well as a man would in the House of Commons.
Not until 1973 did she secure a seat.
Really, at that time, you've got to remember the House of Commons was overwhelmingly men. In fact, when she was elected to the Speaker's chair, it was 90% men, the House of Commons, and 10% women, and yet she managed to convince them that she was absolutely the right person.
It was the role she seemed born to. Impartial, formidable, a fierce defender of parliamentary tradition.
That is the point I am trying to get over.
She was a speaker that we were all in awe of. Quite rightly, a strong Yorkshire woman who came to the House, achieved every goal that she wanted to. And the fact that she was the first ever woman speaker, she broke that glass ceiling.
This afternoon, the Commons stood in quiet contemplation of her memory. It was a silent mirror of the rare applause that greeted her retirement.
Be happy for me.
Madam Speaker, who brought a little sparkle to an ancient office.
Memories of the magnificent Baroness Betty Boothroyd, who's died at the age of 93. Now, in all the fictional depictions of the future, little attention has ever been given to the impact of robots on our cultural scene, but artificial intelligence could dramatically repaint that landscape. Computer algorithms now so good they can imitate works by the old masters with indiscernible precision. Just as easily, though, contemporary artists can have their unique styles copied. That risks robbing them of an income and all of us of the pleasure of human creative endeavour.
Dulwich Picture Gallery is renowned for its portraits by the masters.
Art is, of course, subjective, but what if in the future the subjects weren't painted by people, but were imagined by machines?
Look closer, you'll see not all is as it seems. This, Van Gogh, is Starry, Starry Manhattan. Here's how we've imagined Vermeer would have painted a woman checking her emails, and this is Rembrandt's Queen eating a burger.
They've all been created by artificial intelligence in a matter of seconds. For example, if I was to type in Super Mario Brothers in the style of Caravaggio, the machine learning algorithm would trawl through the millions of images it's learnt and create me a completely bespoke image.
AI isn't just a game or a gimmick, it's food for thought for the whole art world.
Welcome to Paint Like the Masters.
Polish artist Greg Rogowski has had his name used 300,000 times as a prompt to make AI art, more than Picasso, Michelangelo and Da Vinci combined.
The copyright laws that we know were invented before AI, and right now AI changes everything. I have to be ready to adapt or fight it more or find a way to, I don't know, live with that.
Critics say AI is already putting artists out of work. The entire backdrop of this Netflix Japanese cartoon was imagined by a computer.
Pressing a button, having filled out a form, is not a creative process.
Illustrator and author Rob Biddulph says we risk losing even more than just jobs.
Starting with nothing and ending up with something. You've created something out of your brain via your arm into your pen or your pencil, what you're holding, and you've got something physical and tangible at the end of that process.
There was resistance to cameras when they first arrived. Proponents say AI is just another tool to unlock even more creativity.
AI can create something technically perfect, but actually the old masters, they're flawed. You can see thumbprints in the paint, and that's something actually I don't think artificial intelligence can replicate or is willing to replicate.
Artists in America are launching a legal challenge to protect their intellectual property. In the future, we'll debate not just what art is, but what made it in the first place. Martin Stew, News at 10.
Astonishing. And finally, from images that seem scarcely believable to a sight that must be seen to be believed, those blessed with clear skies tonight stand a decent chance of catching the Northern Lights, and not just in the most northern reaches of the country, but right across the UK.
The beauty of the Northern Lights is unrivalled. From Aberdeenshire to Grasholm in Northumberland and remarkably as far south as Cornwall, this spectacle lit up skies across the British Isles.
It's just one of those things that most people have on their bucket list, so you can't just look at it for 2 seconds and look away. Tonight I'll be sat at the window waiting to see if it comes back again.
Spent a fortune going to Iceland, spent a couple of hours out in the wilderness just trying to find them driving around, and then we could just see them from the back garden for free in my jammies.
The Northern Lights, also known as Aurora Borealis, happens when electrically charged particles leave the sun and interact with the Earth's atmosphere. The result is a swirling river of colour above us. The clarity of last night's spectacle caught many by surprise. This evening, astronomers are preparing themselves once again.
Aurora is actually predicted to be more active tonight. So even if it's cloudy where you are, there's always a chance that you can catch it if you look out your window. And it's amazing to see them as far south as they are, because normally people travel to places like Iceland and Sweden and Norway just to see them.
Ireland too experienced the magic. Sligo in the west awash with colour. And rarely will Stonehenge ever look so dramatic. Perfect conditions permitted this rare spectacle, and if you are blessed with clear skies overnight, then you may catch sight of something incredibly special. Rachel Townsend, News at 10.
And that is all from us for tonight. We're off out to check the skies on our way home. Good night. We will see you tomorrow.